Senator Disick.
Mr. President, I move that further proceedings under the roll call be dispensed with and the Sergeant at Arms be instructed to bring in the absent members.
On that motion, all say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Prayer first, and then the prayer of allegiance, because I do not want to forget prayer. And today's chaplain is former Senate Chaplain Reverend Phil Shaw from St. Michael, Minnesota.
Thanks for not forgetting me. Appreciate that. Well, Senators, nice to see you. It's always nice to see you, be here. It's a privilege and an honor to pray with you. Notice I said with. I hope when I pray that there's unity amongst you to agree with what I say, that it can be a powerful influence for the Lord to bless you. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, we're asking that you stand beside these senators as they deal with the many decisions they face in the session of 2023. Because you know their needs and the needs of the people of our state. And God, you understand the sense of feeling inadequate sometimes when faced with the immense challenges placed before these senators. So we're asking for your divine guidance. Give them wisdom beyond their natural capabilities. Give them courage to do what they feel right in their hearts for the people they serve. And God, thank you for hearing our prayers. In your name we pray. Amen. God bless you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Secretary will take the roll.
Abler, Anderson, Barr, Bolden, Carlson, Champion, Coleman, Swadzinski, Dames, Dibble, Dornick, Draheim, Drazkowski, Duckworth, Diedzik, Eichhorn, Farnsworth, Fateh, Frentz, Green, Grunhagen, Gustafson, Hoschild, Herr, Hoffman, Housley, Howe, Jasinski, Johnson, Klein, Curran, Kroon, Kanesh, Kupek, Lang, Latz, Liskey, Limmer, Lucero, Mann, Marty, Matthews, May Quaid, McEwen, Miller, Mitchell, Mohammed, Morrison, Murphy, Nelson, Umuverbaten, Pappas, Pa, Port, Pratt, Putnam, Rarick, Rasmussen, Rest, Seeberger, Utke, Weber, Wiesenberg, Westland, Westrom, Wickland, Zhang.
Pursuant to Rule 14.1, the following members intend to vote under Rule 40.7. Bowdoin, Rochester. A quorum is present. We will now proceed to the second order of business, executive and official communications. The following communications were received and referred as indicated. We will now proceed to the fifth order of business. Senator Disick for a motion to adopt the committee report.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the committee reports printed in the agenda be adopted with the exception of the report pertaining to appointments.
On the adoption of the committee reports, all in favor say aye.
Mr. President. Thank you.
Senator Abler, sorry about that.
That's okay, yeah. So prior to the vote, and I don't intend to spend very long discussing this, but I wanted to call attention in particular one committee report, which is Senate File 1. And we had the chairman conducted a very respectful hearing yesterday. We had many witnesses, and it was, I think, a well-done hearing. The only gap I see was the inadequate amount of time to be able to flesh out some of the very important issues in this bill, which is clearly one of the chief priorities of your caucus, Mr. President. And I wouldn't have even stood up today, but in the paper today, I staring me was a headline in the B section of the Tribune. It says, "Dad charged as baby fights to live." And tragically, a 31-year-old woman was shot by her boyfriend, I think in a parking lot. And the infant that she was carrying was not then taken by cesarean. And they're hoping that this individual can live. And so there were some questions we didn't, and so in the article it refers to this person as a baby, which I thought was appropriate. And so some of the questions we didn't get to answer was, when does a person become a person? And I queried the author, and she was not desirous of replying to that.
Mr. President, point of order.
Who called? Okay, there you go.
President.
Senator Latz.
Mr. President, I understand we have a motion before us. I'm not sure if the comments being made are related to that motion, but so far it doesn't sound like it.
I want to remind the body that we are under a motion to adopt the committee reports, and it must only be to and for that limited purpose. So this is just as a caution. If you'd be so kind as to speak only to the motion that is before the body. Senator Abler.
Mr. President, and to the point of order, it seems to me that the committee reports as they move through the floor are the only opportunity that members have to see what is going on in committees. And if you would prefer, I'm happy to separate this committee report into a separate motion, and then I will speak to why I think we should say no, but I'm merely going to offer a few thoughts and then sit down. So it's your pleasure, Mr. President, but I would like to offer a few thoughts about the goings-on of that committee.
So, Senator Abler, to your, what I believe is also a question, whether my preference would be for you to speak to the motion or allow you to veer off a little from the motion. My preference is for you to speak to the motion, and if you have something else that you want to put forward, we are certainly hear that if it's in order. But right now, we're under adoption of the committee report. So if you could limit your conversation around that, that would be important. There may be another time on the agenda where if there's some additional thoughts that you have about what's in the news, that you can certainly do it at that particular time. Senator
Well, Mr. President, I don't put you in a spot, so at this point I would move to divide the committee reports and like to discuss Senate File 1 separately, and I would be making a motion to not adopt. So I would be happy to have done it the other way, but you've driven me to this, and I don't want to take away your right to rule. So that's my request, Mr. Chair.
So, Senator Abler, just so that we're clear, that you can certainly say don't adopt it because that's why we vote. Okay. So you
Mr.
certainly
President,
have that option now.
Let me withdraw my motion then, but I just want a chance to offer a few concerns. This is a big deal. And we had a nice hearing, but we didn't have time to answer all the questions. And so I think the body would be well advised to know what kinds of questions they would want to be asking as it moves forward, since we didn't get to do it here.
So again, Senator Abler, I just want to make sure that we have a very limited conversation because we're under the motion to adopt, and you can certainly make some comments, but I do not want us going too far outside of what is in front of the body, because what we do now is the precedent that we set for later, and I don't want to be accused of allowing certain members to go outside of what's before the body, and then when we seek to restrain others, that it looks as if I'm demonstrating favoritism. So I'm trying to be as fair as possible. Okay. So what is before the body is the motion to adopt the committee report. Senator Abler.
Okay. Well, and thank you. I just, and so I intended to be brief in the first place, Mr. Chair. This has already taken more time than my whole comments would have taken. But there's some things that we didn't get a chance to talk about, which I just want to give you a list at least. The practices, we talked about, can a person view an ultrasound if it's available? And so I would like to have asked
Mr. President, point of parliamentary inquiry.
Senator Latz, point of parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. President, in the discussion relating to a motion to adopt committee reports, is it in order to discuss the underlying substance of the bill that is being reported and re-referred, or is it merely a procedural question that's before the body?
To that point, Senator Latz, it is my understanding, based on the rules, that is a very limited discussion, which is only to the motion whether we should adopt the committee report or not to the substance of the what's in the report. Senator Latz.
Then, Mr. President, to that point, if Senator Abler has an objection to the process by which the committee has issued its report, or whether there's an appropriate or inappropriate re-referral being made, it seems that might be in order, but a discussion about the underlying substance, the pros and cons of the bill that is being re-referred through the committee report process would not be in order. And I ask the President to so rule and restrict Senator Abler's comments only to the procedural question before the body.
So,
Mr. President,
Senator Abler.
would it be more appropriate, and would I have the liberty to spend a minute and a half discussing my concerns about the bill if I made a motion to re-refer it to the Committee on Health and Human Services? Would that be more appropriate? And then I would have time to have my minute and a half then, Mr. President?
Senator Abler, just so that we're clear, because of course you are certainly entitled to your thoughts, and I don't want anyone ever to think that that the President is not willing to hear and to listen. But I think and believe that there are certain times when your thoughts are appropriate. So with that being said, this is a procedural motion, and
Right.
I do not want to give liberties for individuals to believe that we can talk substance when this is more procedural. So if you want to put forward a motion to re-refer, we can certainly do that if that's what you want to do, because it's not an issue of time. It's really what is appropriate at that particular moment.
And Mr. President, I totally get that. And just a point of
Senator
parliamentary
Abler.
inquiry, if I did make that motion to re-refer it back to the committee so we could have more time, then I could have a chance to explain why I thought we needed more time. Is that correct, Mr. President? So if I make the
Senator
motion to
Abler.
re-refer it, then I would have my minute and a half to describe why we need more time and why we should indeed vote in favor of re-referring it. That's a debatable motion, right?
So Senator Abler, Senator Latz raised a point of order. I'm trying to be as thoughtful and give you as much flexibility
Right.
as possible. But we're going back and forth, and I don't want to create a precedent as if this is okay, because it's not the way that the tradition of the Senate has been handled. So if you want to do a motion to re-refer, you cannot raise that motion until after the underlying committee report has been adopted or not, right? And then you can then come forward and raise a motion to re-refer. So remember, it's not an issue of time.
Right.
It is not an issue of whether you can take 30 seconds and it's done. It's what is appropriate at that particular time based on the rules. So so if you give me no other choice, then I'll rule on the point
Right.
of order that Senator Latz has indicated, but I'm trying to be as thoughtful as possible.
Mr. President, I'm willing to suspend my comments on this motion. So when would the appropriate time to make a motion to re-refer be so I can do my 1.5 minutes of comments?
Senator Miller.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, does Senator Abler have the opportunity to share why he would not support the adoption of the committee reports at this time?
Well, to your question, he can, but the moment that you start going beyond the bounds of what's in the news and all the other things, then you're not speaking to the point that is before the body. He was doing okay until he started saying, I was reading in the news and I saw what happened, someone else getting shot. We are now far afield of what is before the body. So that is the issue. So, Senator Abler, if you want to speak to the motion, that's it, and not the other things, unless I will then, if you give me no other choice, then I will rule on Senator Lass's point of order.
And Mr. President, I'm not trying to step on the traditions of the Senate. I think the Senate's amazing, and I think given the past presidents here, they would maybe agree that you're right, and I think you're not wrong in that. But so there will be times when a bill has moved that a member has concerned about, and so the motion that's most appropriate for them would be to make a motion to re-refer the bill back to where they had their concerns about. And so, Mr. President, when is the time for that? Are you going to vote to re-refer this bill, and then I'm going to vote to un-re-refer it?
No.
Is that motion?
So to your question, Senator Abler, as I indicated earlier, and I want to make sure that I am being very clear, that what is before the body is whether we should adopt the committee report. Once action has been taken on that notion, then we can then deal with your motion to re-refer. Because if you look at Rule 21, objections to a committee referral, you can certainly do it at the time that the bill is reported by the standing committee. And just so that I'm being really clear, if you want to invoke a Rule 21, which is to object to the committee referral and for it to return to where it was previously referred, you can certainly do that now under Rule 21, if that's what you want to do.
Mr. President, I'm not trying to stop
And
it.
just so that you're clear, if you invoke Rule 21, it is without debate under Rule 21. So what would you like to do?
Well, Mr.
Senator
President, I
Abel?
don't desire that this go to the Rules Committee. I'm not trying to obstruct the will of the majority, but I'm just trying to create a place where there are certain key items that were not resolved in the committee that should have resolved them, and that's my concern. And I had a very short list of items to enumerate, and that's my pleasure. And so So we're about to vote to approve the committee report and the re-referral. Without resorting to Rule 21, could I simply have a motion that it be re-referred back to the Human Services Health Committee, and then we'll have a chance to express my 1.5-minute comment then?
You can certainly do that. So is it your motion to under Rule 21 to re-refer it back to the previous committee?
Well, Mr. Chair, I'd like an opportunity to offer why I think that's important. And so is there no vehicle available to me to offer why that might be an important thing to do to solve these unresolved issues? This is entertaining.
So just for clarification, and then I will acknowledge you, Senator Pratt, to your question, just so that we are clear, the motion now is whether to adopt the committee report. Once that is done, if you want to later on under motions and resolutions, if you then want to ask that, put forth a motion for it to be re-referred under Rule 21, you can do so at that particular time.
Mr. President, point of inquiry.
1 second, just so that I'm clear, under motions and resolutions, you don't necessarily have to do it Rule 21. You can just say that you make a motion for it to be re-referred back to the committee. So it doesn't necessarily have to be under Rule 21.
And Mr. President, may I offer a 1.5-minute comment under that motion?
At that time?
At that time.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. President, well, I'll let Senator Pratt speak.
Senator
That may be
Pratt.
my pro-
Thank you, Mr. President. I just have a quick parliamentary question. We are adopting all of the committee reports. Is there an opportunity to separate out this one committee report for discussion on whether it should be adopted and reviewed versus being more of a consensus on all the committee reports? Is there an opportunity to split the motion?
You can certainly divide the committee reports. If that's what you so choose, you can certainly do that. But that does not get you to the issue of debating it. That's the issue.
Mr. President?
Senator Abler.
So I suggest you proceed with the vote that you're attempting to go with, and then when motions and resolutions come forward, I'd like to make a motion that it be re-referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services.
You can certainly
Thank you.
do that.
Thank you, Mr. President. So let me know when that is, please.
Thank you, Senator Abler, for that engagement. Now, back to where we are.
Mr. President,
Is someone calling?
to your left.
Oh, sorry about that. Senator Lucero,
Point of parliamentary inquiry.
state your point.
Thank you. I am wondering if it would be in order, would a motion to table the motion to adopt be in order, and if so, would that be a debatable motion?
Just give me one moment. I'm going to look just to make sure that I'm correct. I have a thought. Senator Lucero, you know that you had me doing some additional homework, but you know I was going to get my homework done. So thank you for the question. The question before the body is whether it would be appropriate in order to bring a motion in order to lay it on the table. But the first, to lay the adoption of the committee report on the table. Just for clarity, usually it is permissible in order to bring a motion in order to lay it on the table, and then that motion for anything else would be appropriate and non-debatable. We've already covered that. But the question before the body, what makes this interesting, is whether we can, whether a motion to lay a committee report adoption on the table. And if you look at Mason's, under rule, hold on one second, section 331, 3, it says, it is not in order to lay on the table a class of motions such as orders of the day, unfinished business, or reports of committees, because only one main motion can be pending at a time. So it would not be appropriate. Next question, Senator Miller.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just for clarity, to hopefully try to prevent this from happening in the future, if a member objects to the adoption of the committee reports, does that member have the opportunity to share why they object to the adoption of the committee reports?
Senator Miller, on a very limited basis, they can just stand and say, I'm just using an example, do not believe that this committee report should be adopted because there are a number of different things that we didn't do, period. Not the substance of it, not all the other things, right? Because we are dealing with a very limited procedural question, and their vote really is their voice, because if they don't want to support it, they can just vote no. Senator Miller.
Thank you, Mr. President. So a member does have the opportunity to explain why they object to the adoption of the committee reports without going into the substance of the actual committee report.
Absolutely, as long as we are dealing with the procedural issue, because that's all it is, right? It's procedural, and you can say, I don't think that we should adopt this because the committee needs to continue to do its work. Boom. Not necessarily the additional substance. And as we mentioned earlier, Senator Miller, there's always an opportunity under motions and resolutions if someone wants to bring a motion for it to be re-referred back someplace else, and then that wouldn't be debatable, but at least they can, speak to that question. And voting is our voice. Voting is our voice. All right. Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr.
There's also provision that says that we should not have dilatory debate as well, right? So I will cite that rule shortly, but Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Is the motion that is on the table a privileged or an incidental motion?
It is a main motion.
Not a privileged or?
No.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Without any further discussion, the issue before us is the adoption of the committee report. All in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Division has been called, and division is granted. All those in favor of the motion, please stand. And we ask that others have an opportunity to So you may have to stand a little bit. We want to make sure that we get everyone in, so please remain standing. And remember that we're under vote, so I would ask that you keep all conversation to a minimum. Thank you so very much. Senator Friends.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Under our remote voting rules, I report Senator Bolden votes aye on the adoption.
Senator Bolden votes aye.
Mr. President.
Senator Miller.
Thank you, Mr. President. What do our Senate rules say about members voting remotely on a division?
I'll double check that. Give me one moment. Senator Miller. Senator Miller, thank you so very much to your question. It is my understanding the practice has been, since we instituted remote voting, that a member can be recognized for division, and it has been counted historically. I've talked to staff, and that is the information that I've been given, and there's been no change in the circumstances. That's my understanding. You saw me caucusing with the staff.
Point of order, Mr. President.
We are under a vote.
Point of order, Mr. President.
State your point of order.
Mr. President, under the remote voting rules, I was not treated that way, and many of us weren't. So my recollection of the rules and the precedent we've set under remote voting is divisions, you don't get counted if you're on remote. That's been one of the issues that's come up over the past 2 years, and the precedent is opposite of what you're just telling the body, because I was one that learned the hard way.
If you give me a moment and I'll respond. Just give me one moment, Senator Reston. Senator Westrom, thank you so kindly for your patience. I did have an opportunity to continue to talk about the evolving notion of remote voting. It is my understanding that in the very beginning that one could not vote under division if they were voting remotely. Then over time, it was permitted and it was agreed upon that that would be acceptable, and it was. So it's possible that where you made that request, where it was not recognized then, but later on it was recognized, and that is my understanding from the custom and usage of remote voting.
Mr. President.
Senator Matthew.
Mr. President, that simply is not correct. As the former majority and one that was helping up in the president's chair, under custom and usage of the Senate, we never operated under that way. The rules do not state that we can operate that way. And so unless the new majority is intending to be whatever we want to do, we're going to do regardless of what the rules say, which seems to be multiple examples of that already in the new session, you need to adhere to the rules of the Senate and adhere to the custom and usage of the Senate and act accordingly with the division votes here on the Senate floor. That's my request.
I would take one more moment of advice, and then I'm going to rule, because since a point of order has been raised, and I want to make sure that we bring some closure to this ongoing debate, I am prepared to rule. Senator Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm wondering, Mr. President, if you could share with the body the date and the actual incident at which the custom and usage changed on this as you tried to communicate to the body. Is there a particular example you can state and share with us?
Thank you. So I do not have a date and time. It is my understanding that it was moving, and according to staff, that is how it's been used and interpreted. So to Senator Westrum's point, of order, it is not well taken. Now, we will continue to vote and recognize the...
Mr. President?
Mr. President.
Mr. President.
I appeal the ruling of the chair.
Well, if you want to appeal, then here's what I'm going to ask. Those in the back, please have a seat.
Can I have a roll call on that?
Yes. Roll call has been requested and a roll call granted. Now it's 14.4.
Mr. President.
Hold on one moment, please. Because we are under a vote, I'm just giving some language. It wouldn't be appropriate to speak at this particular point, but I will recognize you as soon as the vote finishes, okay? Senator Lucero?
Mr.
Here it is. An appeal from the decision of the president must be made immediately after the ruling, which it is. It is too late to appeal after debate or other business has intervened. That's why I'm not allowing for any other business to intervene. The question before the body is, shall the decision of the president be the judgment of the Senate? A green vote upholds the decision of the president, and a red vote to overrule the decision of the president. We are now going to vote. The secretary will take the roll.
Mr. President, parliamentary inquiry.
That parliamentary inquiry wouldn't be appropriate while the vote is going on, Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, is debate allowed before the vote?
No, we are voting. Senator Westrom, please have a seat. Thank you so much. And I will certainly recognize you afterwards. Senator Friends.
Thank you, Mr. President. I report a green vote for Senator Bolden.
Senator Bolden votes green. Aye.
Mr. President.
Senator Jasinski.
Point of order. So can you just ask me a question?
Sir,
can I ask a question?
Listen, not during the vote.
Okay, I'll wait.
I'll recognize you. I'll recognize you right after the vote, if that's okay. The secretary will close the roll with 34 ayes and 33 nays. The decision of the president is upheld. Now, I'm going to go in the order in which I stated, if that's okay. Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I was going to ask for a point of parliamentary inquiry, and that was going to be, is a motion to overrule the president a debatable motion?
No. No, it's not debatable. Senator Westrom.
Well, Mr. President, I was going to ask the same question that Senator Lucero just did, but while I've got the floor, Mr. President, advice, well, just point of information, Mr. President, I specifically remember the former secretary announcing to the body, because I challenged the question on the division, and being told specifically I was standing right over here next two desks back from me when Secretary Ludeman explained to me and others that a division vote does not get counted by those that are remote.
Point of order.
Just want to share that information with you, Mr. President. I'm going to do some more research.
Point of order, Mr. President.
Senator Jasinski.
Point of order, Mr. President.
Senator Latz. Please state your point of order.
Mr. President, Senator Westrom, immediately after you ruled that there was no debate on this, Senator Westrom stood up to add debate to the question that was before the body. At this time, we are in the middle of a division, of a vote on the motion to adopt the committee report. And I don't think we can do anything other than complete that vote, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
That is true. We are in the middle of a vote because remember the point of personal privilege came up first, and I ruled, and the decision of the president was challenged, so we have to go back to the underlining vote where we were, Senator Nelson. So after the vote, we will then return, and I'll certainly will recognize you at that time. All right? So
Mr. President, I stood before Senator Westrom asked for the division. So I want to make sure you know that I want to speak to this, and I should be speaking before the vote.
Thank you so very much. And I will remind the body that it's always important to be respectful when you're talking to the president, because I will always be respectful when I'm talking to you as well. And this body has been one of being respectful to each other, even if we disagree. So if I missed you, I do apologize, but I will certainly recognize you. But I will just remind the body that we have to be very thoughtful as to how we address each other and the president. So with that being said, and I'm going to come back to you, Senator Nelson, as well as Senator Jasinski, but we were in the middle of a vote, and so I want to deal with that vote. Division was asked, and we will now ask those who are in favor, please stand. On the motion to adopt, remember the motion to adopt, right? I want to make sure that we are clear. And I know we have some folks who are coming in, and I will give them time in order to do so. Thank you for your patience, members. You can have a seat. With 33 members standing and acknowledging the vote of Senator Bolden, that is 34 votes. That is sufficient to adopt the committee's report. The committee's report has been adopted. Now, I did say I was going to recognize a couple people. One was Senator Nelson.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for the focus on rules. I think one of the challenges and problems that we've had lately is we do not have the new rules in our desk. The rules I have are from 2021 to 2022, and I did want to note on the important portion on voting, Rule 40.2 says, except as provided in Rules 40.7 and 40.8, a member may vote on a question or be counted on a division only at the member's own seat in the Senate chamber. And then if we look at Rule 40.7 and 40.8, the exception is during a peacetime public health emergency. A member may vote on a question from a location outside the Senate chamber in accordance with Rule 40.8. Members, we are not in a peacetime emergency. These are the rules at our desk, Mr. President. And my question would be, I know we had a lengthy debate about new rules just last week, but Mr. President, when will we be able to effectively operate under those rules? When will those rules be in our desks? And I think that might help some of the confusion that we've seen today.
Thank you so very much, Senator Nelson. To your question is clear. One is the engrossed rules have been published, is my understanding. You can those engrossed rules are available now, but we are getting them printed. We are getting them printed so that you will have it in your desk. So that will be done expeditiously. I do not know the date, but we will certainly do it as soon as possible. Senator Nelson, is your follow-up, and I just want to caution the body, once a ruling has been made by the president, that's already done. I don't mind engaging because I want to make sure that we bring as much clarity to the floor as possible. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I will note that I received a copy as we were speaking, so we do hope all members get copies. My question was not to the ruling, but I think it's important for the body to know, under the rules that were just delivered to my desk, was it allowed, eventually I'll get to look at them here, was it appropriate, and where is it that it was allowed for a member to vote on a division being absent from their own Senate desk? What of our new rules allowed for that? Because I thought, Mr. President, I heard you say that nothing had been changed since the previous rules, but maybe I misunderstood. So if you could maybe direct me to the new rule that allowed for division when a member is not present at the Senate.
Senator Nelson, I am going to say, number one, about the engrossed rules. I told you that those were available. Number two, that you'll get a printed copy. And number three, if you go back, because you are debating my ruling, so I want to make sure that you're really clear about that, because you asked me to go back to the rule, it's custom and usage, and how I explained after consulting with the staff as to what has happened over time with the division, and whether a person who's voting under 40.7, whether that vote would be counted for division purposes. So my ruling has already occurred, and I got that information from the staff, okay? So Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. I pass.
Thank you so much. Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, reason why we are into another hour of debate after 8 hours of debate last week is because we have decided, apparently here in this chamber, that when we have a rule that flies in the face of what the majority is trying to get done on this floor, we're just going to throw these rules out, and we're going to do what we want to do. Mr. President, you just advised us, which I wholeheartedly agree with, that we need to treat every member here in the Senate with the respect and decorum that this body demands of that. Chief among that, Mr. President, is we need to follow these rules of the Senate. I do not see a hidden Rule 59 in this booklet. And for those of you wondering, there's only rules numbered up to 58 in this book. There is not a rule number 59 that says the majority can change whatever rule they want at any time they want to get something done. And Mr. President, as I pointed out earlier, your custom and usage is just factually incorrect with how the Senate has operated under remote voting under Rule 40.7 and 8 the last few years. And I know that because I personally administrated a number of those motions from that desk right up there. And so, Mr. President, I do encourage the Senate to treat all our members with respect and decorum that we deserve. But we need to follow the rules of the Senate, and we need to have rulings that are consistent with the rules of the Senate. And I think the reason why we're coming into some of these lengthy debates is because the strike zone has at times been shaky, or we've looked at things where the black and white letter of the rules says one thing and the ruling has been another. And we cannot have that here on this floor if we're going to operate the way that you and I expect this chamber to operate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Matthews, for your words, but I just want to make sure that we're clear and that the public is clear. As I indicated the very first moment that I was elected, that I will always be fair and thoughtful, and any information that I convey is based on information received. And Senator Matthews, you have stood in this place, and I remember a couple days ago that you said to me, quote, I understand that you have a number of things moving and that there are a number of variables that are always going to be a part of your decision making as you stand in this seat. Even though usually you sit, but I'm saying standing for this purpose. With that understanding, you said that you do not see a rule that is Rule 59 of something of that nature. But you know, and whether you agree with me or not every notion or rule of custom and uses is articulated clearly in our rule book. But what we do know is that the spirit of our custom and uses is a part of those rules. Now, whether we agree or disagree, I recognize that the same mouth that can transfer truth can transfer error, and that two people can be looking at the same thing and come up with a different result. But what I will say is that we will continue to be fair, and that it is not based on, and this president is not doing things based on party, because I see every person in here as my colleague, and that I have a responsibility, even after the work that has been done by the other presidents that you so eloquently articulated, to make sure that we are being as thoughtful and as fair as humanly possible, because it's not about party, it's about practice, and it's about let's go forward. And the last thing that I'll say, I think it's important for us to get to the rest of the agenda so that we can deal with the ills and challenges that Minnesotans are experiencing. There was someone else that had their hand up before you, Senator Drazkowski, okay? Senator Pratt.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. And just a couple of requests, Mr. President. Well, one clarification and one request. Mr. President, I would refer you to Mason's Section 4.2, which talks about the order of precedence, the top precedence being the Constitution, the second precedent being adopted rules, and then the third precedent being custom and usage. Mr. President, we have to follow our rules above and beyond custom and usage, and custom and usage does not allow us to circumvent the adopted rules. Mr. President, I would also ask, as a follow-up, because it seems to be a very clear point of contention, that there be provided to the minority documentation of when the rule on division changed. I respect your integrity, Mr. President, and I'm sure you're taking the advice that you've been given from staff, but then that advice has to be followed up with hard facts, because those of us that were in the majority, when you claim that the precedent had been changed, do not recall when that changed, and we certainly have members that have a different experience. So, Mr. President, I request that you provide to the body specific documentation on when that custom and precedence changed.
Mr. President, point of order.
Senator Latz, please state your point of order.
Trying to determine what agenda item we are under, but I don't see an agenda item that says we can continue to debate previous rulings of the president that have already been voted on and upheld by the Senate. It sounds like some of these conversations are out of order based on our agenda here today, and I don't see any provision elsewhere that would allow for it. So I'd ask that we can move on with the agenda of the Senate.
So we are under, Senator Latz, the fifth order of business, report of committees. That is where we are, the second portion. But let me speak specifically to Senator Pratt's inquiry. What I will do is, even us going forward, even today, I'll continue to ask staff to dig for that information so that we can get your question answered about the specificity as to when that changed and if it in fact changed. If I receive different information, I will certainly come back to this body and let the body know what I'm finding out. But I can't do that if I'm doing 2 or 3 things at one time, and I'll be happy to take your thoughts and continue to ask staff to dig and find the information. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I'm sorry. Senator Johnson, Senator Drazkowski was up before you, if you don't mind. Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for those most recent words, because I think therein lies what's very important. And Senator Pratt laid out very clearly Constitution, rules, custom, and usage. And what we just saw was the majority in the Senate attempting to change the interpretation of custom and usage in this body. My understanding, Mr. President, is 2 years, 2 full years of remote voting went on in this body, and not once in those 2 years was someone that was in a remote capacity allowed to weigh in with the division. And so,
Senator Drazkowski, a point of order has been asked. State your point of order, Senator Latch.
Mr. President, I believe Senator Drazkowski's comments are out of order. We are on motions to adopt the committee reports. These are out of order, and we ask the President to rule as such.
Senator Drazkowski, if we would just keep our comments to what is before the body, which is the fifth order of business, and I just think that would be important for us to keep our comments to the fifth order of business. I've already indicated to Senator Pratt that we'll continue to look at that information, so I don't think it's fair to castigate it as what the majority is doing. We will get the information, and as soon as I, as the President, get that information, I'll certainly share that information with you.
thank you, Mr. President. If it helps the Senator, I will raise my request to a level of a privileged motion. I raise a point of parliamentary inquiry, Mr. President, if that's helpful. And the area that I'm inquiring about, Mr. President, is the area that we just saw happen. We saw the majority attempting to redefine custom and usage of this body. And so what you said, Mr. President, is very important.
Senator Drazkowski, I just want to make sure that we are clear. Are you asking for a personal privilege?
I am not, Mr. President. I am invoking a privilege motion, which is a parliamentary inquiry.
Okay, so you got to make that inquiry, and once you make that inquiry, then I will rule on your inquiry. But it is not to invoke other things. So please raise your point of order.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. My experience with parliamentary procedure is that a point of parliamentary inquiry is an open-ended inquiry that happens to the presiding officer, and that's what I'm attempting to do here, Mr. President. We have, at this point, seen an attempt by the majority in this body to suffocate 2 years of custom and usage that have happened here in this body. And Mr. President, your words earlier are very, very important, and that is that we need to have this body presented,
Mr. President,
with the examples, Mr. President, that you outlined. And so I think Senator Pratt's discussion and yours is very important here.
Senator, just two things. First, when I interrupt as the President under our rules, you're supposed to stop talking. I really recognize that sometimes we want to get everything out, and I do recognize that. But our order requires that when a point of has been raised, I'm to recognize them, but you're to stop talking, and then I have to make sure that the order in which he raises is legitimate. Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask that you find Senator Drazkowski's comments out of order. It is not a parliamentary inquiry which is being raised. Thank you, Mr. President. If there's an inquiry, inquire.
So just so that the body's clear as to what is a parliamentary inquiry or privilege, as Senator Drazkowski indicated, if you look at Masons under Section 221, it states that some of the questions that are recognized as questions of privilege of the House are as follows: organization of the House, expelling or censuring a member of the member's capacity to serve, call of the House when quorum is present, comfort of the member, freedom from disturbance, disorderly conduct of members, conduct of officers or employees, or removal or censure of officers or employees, conduct of reporters or the press for accuracy published reports, and accuracy of the journal and records of House. Now, I recognize that there are two aspects to that question of privilege. One is if something is directly with the House, and then the second part is when some people refer to as personal privilege. Under Masons, just so that the body is clear, and then I will recognize Senator Disick, questions of privilege of members must relate to persons as members of the body or relate to charges against their character that would, if true, incapacitate them from membership. They are not entitled to the floor of a question of personal privilege unless the subject that they propose to present relates to them in their representative capacity. So members, and this is still in the rule that I'm reading, members raising questions of personal privilege must confine themselves to the remarks that concern them personally. When speaking under personal privilege, members have no right to defend any person other than themselves. So, Senator Disick, and then I'll come back because I think she's raising a point of privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President.
But if a person rises for a privilege, that's elevated. So that's why I'm rising to see if there's an issue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Having voted on the prevailing side, I move that the vote whereby the committee report was adopted be reconsidered, and I ask for a roll call.
So Senator Disick makes a motion that the adoption of the committee report, because she was on the prevailing side, be reconsidered. To that motion, I'll say aye.
Mr. President, I ask for a roll call.
Roll call has been requested. A roll call has been granted. Is everyone clear as to what the motion is? Okay, Senator Disick, having voted on the prevailing side, Senator Disick moved that the vote whereby the committee report adopted on today, January 11th, be now reconsidered. So the secretary will take the roll. Senator Disick or Senator Friends?
Thank you, Mr. President. I report Senator Bolden votes aye.
Senator Bolden votes aye. All those who voted have voted with 65 ayes and 0 nays. The motion to reconsider is adopted. Senator Disick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the committee reports printed in the agenda, with the exception of the report pertaining to appointments, be adopted, and I ask for a roll call vote.
Senator Disick, on that motion, a roll call has been requested, a roll call has been granted. The secretary will take the roll. Secretary will need a moment, but get prepared to vote. Senator Friends.
Thank you, Mr. President. I report Senator Bolden votes aye.
Senator Bolden votes aye. The secretary will close the roll. Seeing that there are 34 ayes and 33 nays, the motion to adopt is adopted.
Mr. President.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. In light of the motions that were just given, is there any new information regarding the pattern practice of the Senate regarding the division vote for remote members?
Thank you, Senator Johnson, for that question. I recommit myself to having staff who are digging and looking, and I will certainly come back to the body and let you know exactly what I find out, because I really do want us to get to the bottom of that. So you do have my commitment on that, and I'll come back and let you know exactly what we find out. Any additional discussion before we go to the next order of business? I know. Continuing under reports of the committee, I'm going to call on Senator Disick to lay the appointment on the table. Senator Disick.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the committee reports pertaining to the appointment be laid on the table.
To that motion, all in favor?
I ask for a roll call vote.
Sorry about that, Senator Disick. Roll call requested, roll call granted. The secretary will take the roll.
Mr. President, is it reports of the committees, or it's the relating to the appointments only, correct?
It is only for the appointments only. We're waiting for the board to come up. The motion is to lay the appointment on the table. Yeah, he should draft it after his vote, then I'll let you know. Senator Friends.
Thank you, Mr. President. I report Senator Bolden votes aye.
Senator Bolden votes aye. The secretary will close the roll. After having voted, there are 52 ayes and 14 noes. The motion is adopted. We are now moved to the sixth order of business, second reading of Senate files. The secretary will read Senate file numbers.
Senate file number 40.
The Senate file has been given its second reading. We'll now move to the eighth order of business, which is introduction and first reading of Senate bills. The bills are listed on today's introduction calendar and are given their first reading and referred as indicated, with the following changes. If you go to Senate file number 143, that bill has been referred to the Committee on Environment, Climate, and Legacy. We're moving to the ninth order of business, which is motion. the introduction of the first reading of Senate bills. The bills are listed on today's introduction calendar and are given their first reading and referred as indicated. Now we're on to the ninth order of business, motion and resolutions. We will adopt the author's motions as one motion. All in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Senator Abler.
Thank you, Mr. President. And even though it's taken quite a long time to get to my minute and a half, I think it's been constructive. And I appreciate that you have done your best to direct this body to an orderly process, and I think we've clarified some things. So I think it's not for naught. And I appreciate your attention to the respect for all, and your listening, and your demeanor on the President's podium, and I'm still happy I voted for you. So, Mr. President, I would move that Senate File 1 be withdrawn from the Committee on State and Local Government and Veterans and re-referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services.
Senator Abler moved that Senate File Number 1 be withdrawn from the Committee on State and Local Governments and Veterans and re-referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services. Senator Abler.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just have a few brief comments. And I wish we would have had more time to discuss this. This is why I wanted to go back, because there's some topics, and I'll try to be as brief as I can and not expand. But this is, as I mentioned, apparently the Senate majority's #1 priority, at least very high priority. And it's not a minor bill by any amount, and some of the issues that relate to this are reflected in today's Tribune, where this dad was charged as baby fights to live, as a unborn child was tragically involved with the death of his mother. But so there's some questions that need to be fleshed out as we go forward with this, which I think the body would agree with. And I totally believe that no one wants to abort a person. I totally believe that. Not one person in this chamber or in this state. And the question that we begin to flesh out, which is maybe better suited in judiciary, is when does an unborn baby become a person? And we didn't have time to discuss that very far, and so that would be why we'd want to go back. The second question that came up was I would have invited the clinics to come forward and tell me how they handle anesthesia of an unborn child, because they can apparently feel pain past 20 weeks or so. And I would have wanted to know, and we were told at an amendment, they said, don't worry, the clinicians will handle it. I would have asked them, how do you handle this in the clinic, knowing that this child to be aborted would feel pain? And then we also talked about, would there be a way to reduce abortions by having an ultrasound? If it's available, could they just look at it? Maybe not even need the abortion. And so they again said, well, leave it to the providers. I didn't get a chance to have them come forward and say, do you actually do this? And so some of these are just simple guardrails. And Mr. President, I know we do not agree on this, all of us. But what we are going from here, just so people understand, since they have another privilege of being there, and we're actually short one person on the committee, is that we're going from a current law where abortion is allowed towards becoming a fundamental right. And we didn't flesh out that, which I would have wanted more time. So, Mr. President, I think that's about a minute and a half. And I do appreciate your attention to this, and I appreciate the chance to express my concerns. And I did not intend to have the body spend an hour and 20 minutes on this. And so, Mr. President, with respect to the body, I'm not going to take this to a vote. I will withdraw my motion and thank you and the body for their attention. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Abler has withdrawn his motion to withdraw the report from state and local governments and re-refer it to the Committee on Health and Human Services. Senator Kunish.
Thank you, Mr. President. I make a motion to that Senate File 37 be withdrawn from the Committee on State Local Government and re-referred to the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety. Thank you.
Senator Kunish moved that Senate File 37 be withdrawn from the Committee on State and Local Government and Veterans and be re-referred to Judiciary and Public Safety. Have you had an opportunity? Now, first of all, is this your bill?
This is my bill, and I have spoken with both authors, and they are in agreement.
All right.
Or, excuse me, both chairs.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. All those who oppose say no. The motion prevails. I'm going to move to Senate Resolution number 11. Will be re-referred to the Committee on Rules and Administration. Well, before I go there, I'm going to revert back to calling on Senator Aaron McQuaid.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a motion to withdraw Senate File 71 from the Human Services Committee and have it re-referred to the Committee of Health and Human Services. I've spoken to both chairs. It was just referred to the wrong committee, and they've both agreed.
And this is your bill?
Correct.
All right. Any discussion? On that motion, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. The motion prevails. Thank you for your patience. Remaining under the order of business of motion and resolutions, Senator Disick to designate special orders.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pursuant to Rule 26, I designate the following bill to be made a special order for immediate consideration. Members, it's on your desk, and it is House File 31 relating to individual income and corporate franchise tax provisions modified, and basically it's federal conformity. Thank you.
So the next bill under consideration on general orders is House File 31. The Secretary, any discussion? Senator Ress.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the amendment made to House File number 31 by the Committee on Rules and Administration and the report adopted January 10, 2023, pursuant to Rule 45B stricken.
To that motion, any discussions?
Mr. President.
Senator Ress.
Mr. President, the bills were from the House 31 and the Senate 25 were sent for comparison. There were minor differences, which leads to the request under Rule 45 to set aside the Senate file.
All right. Any discussion now? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The motion is adopted. Now the House File 31 is before the body. Senator Ress.
Thank you, Mr. President. I impose a call of the Senate.
A call of the Senate has been imposed.
And further, Mr. President, that it be for the balance of the discussion of the bill.
So noted. Senator Ress.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that further proceedings under the roll call be dispensed with and the Sergeant Orange be instructed to bring in the absent members.
On that motion, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. The motion is adopted. Senator Ress.
Thank you, Mr. President. House File number 31 is indeed the efforts by House members, the governor, and members of the Senate to finally bring into conformity with certain exceptions that are explained in the language of the bill, a number of laws that were enacted by the federal House and Senate and signed into law by President. There have been a number of documents that have been placed on your desks to further describe what those laws were, and they indeed did start in from here. The FCAA law from 2019, the Families First coronavirus response, March 18th, 2020, the CARES Act, the CAA Act, the American Rescue Plan, ARP, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and then the Inflation Reduction Act as of August 16th, 2022. The way the language in the bill is laid out is by reference to the Internal Revenue Code. So if we're conforming, it says the date of the Internal Revenue Code, that's what we are affirming that we are conforming to. When you see language in the bill, that is usually an issue of where we decide not to conform because we prefer Minnesota state law as a better policy than what the federal Congress did. So it's really easier to understand unless you have a particular question about why something wasn't being conformed to, and something as simple as Minnesota law might say that you're eligible for a benefit at age 18, and federal law says 19. So the proposal is put forward by the governor that we prefer Minnesota giving that benefit to a taxpayer at age 18, and so we state that we do not conform to the Internal Revenue Code at that point with regard to that provision. You will see on your desk not only the Senate Council's summary of this bill, and it is indeed the second engrossment, but you will see two documents referencing the revenue estimate, and the reason for that, and it was communicated to me yesterday evening, and also I in turn communicated it to Senator Weber, and to alert the members of the Republican caucus that there was going to be an amendment because there was a provision that was not accurately estimated. And so there are two documents that have to do with that estimate. And it made a difference for 2024 of $4.4 million, and then so on through the next biennium. That is reflected in the Senate fiscal tracking on line 5, and it has to do with non-resident income calculation nonconformity adjustments. Since we that adjustment is not reflected in the language, it had to in turn be reflected accurately in the revenue estimate, and so it changed the revenue estimate by $4.4 million and led to additional tax relief. So over this period of time, it's it's now $104 million rather than, I think, the original estimate was something like 99.8 or something, something close to that. In the description, in the description, if you look, that is given by Senate Counsel, you will note those items that are being included in this conformity and what benefits are coming to Minnesota taxpayers. If you have any questions about that, I would encourage you just to look at the summary and/or at the fiscal tracking document. And I would draw your attention to the line I just did on line 5 in terms of what the big ticket items, if you will, are included. And one of them is at line 9, which for 2024 would be $14.6 million. Then further down, line, let me make sure I get line 15, which is a depreciation provision, and then line 22, exclusion of economic injury disaster loan advances, and then one provision that has gotten a lot of attention, although it may seem particularly obscure, but nevertheless, exclusion of restaurant revitalization grants from the calculation of income. And what has happened through all of these, through the last, be 4 years now, I guess, is taxpayers, individuals, businesses, farmers, whatever, have gotten deductions because of these federal bills that have been adopted and passed, but because we did not conform for any number of reasons, when a taxpayer filed their tax return for that year, they had to add that deduction that they were taking at the federal level. They had to add it back as income at the state level. So what happens then is in this bill that those deductions will now be allowed through those tax years, and a taxpayer will simply, or sometimes maybe not quite so simply, but will file an amended return for that year and claim those deductions if the taxpayer chooses to do so. I think this is has been a very strong bipartisan effort, and I do appreciate the cooperation and engagement in the Senate Tax Committee, and in particular, Senator Weber and Senator Nelson, who signed on to be co-authors of the bill, along with Senator Dietzig and Senator Dibble. So, Mr. President, that is the substance of the bill. I will tell you that I will not be able to explain in detail every single provision, but this has been, I think, thoroughly vetted to the extent that it is of interest to members of the legislature, and I would appreciate your support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any discussion on House File 31 or amendments? Any discussion? Senator Nelson.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of House File 31 that we have before us now, and I just want to note, members, that many of you voted on a very similar conformity bill on May 11th of 2022, this passed 42 to 22 out of this body. And I wanted to mention how terrific it is that we are going to get an early conformity bill, we believe, out of the Senate. I thank Senator Rest for her lead in that chair position, and hoping that we can get this to the governor's desk, because this will be over $104 million of tax relief to Minnesotans at a time where they may be struggling the most. So I appreciate the speed with which we are taking this up. Know that it, as has been mentioned, it has been well vetted, and it will provide tax relief to Minnesotans, Minnesota businesses, all taxpayers. And I would note one addition, which I think is a positive addition, is that taxpayers will now have until December 31 to file those amended returns. We are conforming to 6 federal tax bills over a number of years, and those will require amendments, but fortunately we have an extended time to be able to file those amended returns and get tax relief to Minnesotans. Thank you.
Senator Miller.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the A1 amendment.
Senator Miller offers the A1 amendment, and the secretary will report the amendment. Senator Miller, to your amendment. Oh, he's going to
we'll let the
report
secretary
it.
report it first, Mr.
I was too
President.
fast there because I said report it, but I didn't give him a chance to report it. The secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Miller moved to amend House File Number 31 as follows. Page 8 after line 30, insert. This is the A1 amendment.
Mr. President, point of order.
Senator Rest.
Mr. President, under Rule 35.2, Clause 2, I ask for this amendment to be ruled out of order on the basis of germaneness.
Mr. President, can I explain the amendment, please?
Senator Rest, I will come back to you because he did not explain his amendment yet, and so it would be appropriate for him to explain the amendment.
Mr. President,
Senator Rest.
The amendment was reported by the secretary. It was before us, and my point of order is appropriate.
So, Senator Rest, I'm going to give Senator Miller an opportunity to explain his amendment, and then we will then revisit your point of order. Senator Miller.
Thank you, Mr. President, members. The A1 amendment is a very simple amendment, but an incredibly important amendment. What the A1 amendment would do is it would fully eliminate the state income tax on Social Security benefits. Minnesota is one of only 12 states that still taxes Social Security benefits, and the A1 amendment would eliminate the state income tax on these Social Security benefits to provide seniors this much-deserved tax relief. And members, this would be effective immediately, tax year 2023.
Senator Rest renews her
point of order.
Point of order under 35.
35.2, Clause 2, line 17, page 17, line 21, on the temporary rules of the Senate that we adopted last week.
All right, advice.
Mr. President, advice?
Mr. President, I think I should be able to, or be permitted to explain why it's not germane.
Yes, Senator Rest, advice.
Thank you. Under that rule, an amendment is out of order when it is intended to accomplish a substantially different purpose other than that of the original bill to which it is proposed. This bill that is in front of us, House File 31, deals with federal conformity, and when an amendment is offered that greatly expands the impact of the bill itself, a substantially different purpose, that is bringing into the debate Social Security, it is out of order. In addition, we are taking this bill up, Social Security up, the idea, the proposals, including one of the language that Senator Miller brings us in the tax committee tomorrow. We can still act on it for this year if we move very quickly, which this body doesn't seem to do successfully, but it is out of order under that provision. And Mr. President, I would hope that you could rule prima facie that this is out of order and you don't need a whole lot of advice.
Senator Miller.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have some advice, and I respectfully disagree with Senator Ress. If you look under the germaneness argument, it says a non-germane amendment includes one of the following. Number one relates to a substantially different subject. Well, clearly they both relate to taxes, so it's not a different subject. Number two is intended to accomplish a substantially different purpose than the original bill in which is being proposed. Well, Mr. President, the original bill that is being proposed reduces income taxes on many Minnesotans. In fact, Mr. President, there are two spreadsheets, two documents on every member's desk. One from the Minnesota Department of Revenue. This is a revenue estimate from the Department of Revenue, and it clearly shows a reduction of income taxes. The A1 amendment is a reduction of income taxes on senior citizens by eliminating the state income tax on Social Security benefits. That's only one of the documents that's on our desk. There's another document titled Senate Fiscal Tracking that also shows a reduction of income taxes. So, Mr. President, the A1 amendment is germane to the underlying bill because it does not relate to a substantially different subject, nor does it intend to accomplish a substantially different purpose.
So I am prepared to rule after having an opportunity to think about this even ahead of time, and then also listening to Senator Miller, then also listening to the advice from Senator Ress, and also reviewing Rule 35, which is germaneness. I am going to rule that the point of order as articulated by Senator Ress is well taken.
Mr. President, I appeal the ruling of the President and request a roll call vote, please.
Senator Miller has asked for my ruling to be appealed, and he has requested and granted a roll call vote, and we will now take the roll. Let me read the information just one more time. The question before the body is, shall the decision of the President be the judgment of the Senate? That's Senate Rule 14.4. A green vote upholds the decision of the President, while a red vote overrides the decision of the President. Now that we're clear, the Secretary will take the roll. Senator Friends.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to report Senator Bolden votes aye.
Senator Bolden votes aye. The secretary will close the roll. All those who desire to vote has voted, and now, with the vote being concluded, 34 ayes and 33 nays, the point of order is upheld. Any additional discussion or amendments? Senator.
Thank you, Mr.
Duckworth.
President.
Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the A2 amendment.
Senator Duckworth offers the A2 amendment. The secretary will report the A2 amendment.
Senator Duckworth moved to amend House File number 31 as follows. Page 11, line 15, strike everything after 1. This is the A2 amendment.
Senator Duckworth, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. As this bill pertains to taxes here in Minnesota, this amendment also speaks to taxes. It deals with things such as earned income, net income, what have you. And this is a good bill. I appreciate it being brought forward expeditiously. However, I think it could be improved. What this amendment seeks to do in the face of the state of Minnesota having an $18 billion surplus is the amendment removes the first tier of income tax for all Minnesotans, meaning over 2.4 million filers would benefit from long overdue tax relief. Additionally, married filers, for an example, would not pay income tax on their first $41,000 of taxable income, or $43,000 in 2023. Those working families would get to save quite a bit of money. Average annual tax relief would likely be over $1,500 per taxpayer. Again, what we're seeking to do is provide relief to Minnesotans by completely eliminating that first tier income tax in the state of Minnesota. Thank you.
Any further discussion?
Mr. President, point of order.
Senator Rest.
Mr. President, I rise to a point of order under
State your point of order.
Rule 35, germaneness, 35.2, Clause 2. And if I may speak to that, please.
You may. Senator Rest.
Thank you. The amendment deals with income taxes that are not in any way a part of conformity. Once again, just as with the Social Security amendment that was offered, this amendment intends to accomplish a substantially different purpose than that of the original bill to which it is proposed, which was not simply a reduction in income taxes. It was indeed the conformity of Minnesota state law to federal law. And there's no federal law in here that reduces or gets rid of the first tier of the individual income tax. And in the amendment, there are adjustments in case you're looking at it and trying to understand what the actual language is. Those numbers that are in and out are adjustments for inflation. So, Mr. President, I would hope that you would once again, on its face, rule that the A2 amendment is out of order.
Advice. Mr. President.
Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. The advice I'd have for you when it comes to the germaneness of the amendment, or whether or not it's relevant to the subject under consideration, is this. It's a tax bill. It covers a whole host of tax issues in there, things like net income, earned income, tax savings you might have if you have dependents. The amendment to the bill does not add a new section. It simply amends language that's already in the bill, therefore making it relevant. This is a bill that has to do with Minnesota tax code. It's a bill that has to do with taxable income. The amendment deals with just that, taxable income of Minnesotans, and it seeks to provide them relief that they have been promised for over a year. Thank you.
Having listened to the various arguments on the floor as it relates to germaneness, which is under Rule 35, having taken advice from Senator Duckworth, as well as listened to the arguments presented by Senator Rest, and after obviously reading the rule, I find that the point of order articulated by Senator Rest is well taken.
Mr. President,
Senator Duckworth.
I respectfully appeal the ruling of the President and ask for a roll call.
A roll call has been requested and a roll call has been granted, and now there has been a challenge to the ruling of the President. The question before the body is, shall the decision of the President be the judgment of the Senate? That is in Senate Rule 14.4. A green vote upholds the decision of the President. A red vote a red vote is to overrule the decision of the President. The Secretary will take the roll. Senator Friends.
Thank you, Mr. President. I report Senator Bolden votes aye.
Senator Bolden votes aye. The Secretary will close the roll. There being 34 ayes and 33 noes, the point of order or the decision of the President is upheld.
Mr. President?
Senator Rest.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to once again thank people who have been working on this bill, including our nonpartisan staff and our partisan staff for that matter, and hope that you can support this bill and send it to the governor this afternoon. I want to go back and thank Senator Nelson for her comments on the floor, in particular noting just how many hundreds of thousands of Minnesotans are going to benefit from this bill this year. 600,000 Minnesota taxpayers are going to start receiving over $104 million in tax relief. And since the Department of Revenue's forms still have to be updated by passing it today and sending it to the governor, that can be accomplished. The federal forms are due to come out the end of the month, and the state forms for users of software or people that use their own, the rules for filing and protocols for filing 2022 tax returns can be done, and for those provisions that have to be accomplished by filing an amended return rather than a true-up. We're not doing that here. We want to be real obvious about that. But you can file an amended return if you feel, as a taxpayer, it is in your best interest. And as a gesture, and it's not symbolic, as a gesture from the governor and from the Department of Revenue, that we recognize that there needs to be amended returns made. We understand, and it will be done, that you have an extra 6 months to file an amended return for the affected tax years. If there are other questions about the bill, we stand, or I stand, I guess, ready to answer them. But, Mr. President, otherwise, I am finished with my presentation.
Thank you, Senator Rest. Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, if I may, I know I've got some other colleagues that would like to speak to this. I would just ask if they maybe allow me to pick up where I left off briefly.
Well, Senator Westrom was recognized. Senator Westrom, are you willing to sit down and let him continue?
I am, Mr. President. Then I do have an amendment.
All right, thank you so much. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Westrom. I greatly appreciate that. Mr. President, I have the A7 amendment.
Senator Duckworth offers the A7 amendment, and the secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Duckworth moves to amend House File Number 31 as follows. Page 11, line 15, strike 38,770. This is the A7 amendment.
Senator Duckworth, to your A7 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it, and I had no doubt that the chief author of this bill would be a tough negotiator. And one of the rules that I've learned when it comes to negotiating is you always ask for something that's maybe a pie-in-the-sky ask you know you might not get, and then hopefully, maybe potentially, as you work back and forth and collaborate, especially when it comes to the betterment of the people of Minnesota, hopefully you can maybe meet somewhere in the middle. So what this amendment does, rather than completely eliminating that first tier of income tax on Minnesotans, it cuts it in half. And if you recall, this is something that we had bipartisan agreement on, or at least it seemed that we had bipartisan agreement on in both chambers just last session. This bill almost passed. So if we can't get that first tier completely eliminated, maybe we can at least take a step in that direction and cut it in half. That's what this amendment seeks to do, Mr. President.
Point of order.
Senator Resk
rises.
For what purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, I rise to a point of order on this amendment under germaneness, Rule 35.2, Clause 2. Once again, half a loaf in addition or less than a full loaf does not make this proposal germane, and it does attempt to once again accomplish a substantially different purpose than that of the original bill to which it is proposed. We have been having hearings in the Senate Tax Committee reviewing last year's conference committee proposal, and that is not what is before us today. It is conformity with federal tax laws, 6 or 7 of them, depending on how you count. And last year's, Senator Drazkowski is smiling. Oh, I want you to note that. It doesn't have anything to substantially. All it does is substantially increase something to which it is not relevant. Tax relief is wonderful. We are going to see a great deal of it in the omnibus tax bill. We're going to see benefits to many, many Minnesotans in other bills that come before us as we accomplish our constitutional duty to pass a balanced budget. But it's not in this bill. This bill is about conformity. It is about bringing $104 million, starting now, of tax relief. If this amendment was ruled germane, if it was ruled germane and we voted on it, do you know how much tax relief Minnesotans would get? Those 600,000 people? Zero. Zero. Because we missed a deadline. This amendment is not germane and should not be accepted once again, Mr. President, on its face.
Advice, Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'll be brief. I agree with the chief author of this bill. Tax relief is a great thing, and we can start with it right here, right now, today. I stand by the advice I gave earlier. This is a bill that has to do with Minnesota tax code and taxable income. This amendment seeks to reduce that first income tier tax for any tax-paying Minnesotan by half. So it is completely germane and relevant to the subject under consideration. Thank you.
Briefly,
Mr. President.
Senator Westrom, advice?
Mr. President, I'd like to offer you advice contrary to the author's arguments of why she maybe doesn't like the amendment, but just because she doesn't support the amendment doesn't make the amendment non-germane. Using the author's testimony on this floor, this bill is already giving tax relief to over 600,000 Minnesotans by changing Minnesota state tax laws, not federal tax laws. The federal conformity, the very purpose of federal conformity is that we change Minnesota tax rates and tax laws. That's what this bill does. This amendment does the exact same thing. It changes tax rates on Minnesota taxpayers. For you to construe this as non-germane is hard to find and very unbelievable. Just because you don't like the subject or the amendment doesn't make an amendment non-germane, Mr. President. And so my advice would be this fits right within the topic in front of us, changing Minnesota's tax codes. And just because the author doesn't like the amendment doesn't make it non-germane. And her arguments and advice were all about why the amendment was not good. That isn't a relevant germaneness argument, Mr. President. My advice is to find the point of order not well taken.
Advice, Senator Putnam.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, members, I stand in support of my colleague, Senator Rest, but at the same time, I'd like to express my support for the provisions suggested by our good friends, Senator Miller and Senator Duckworth. I'm the first one to say that we need to end the tax on Social Security, so much so that I've got a bill that's going to do that we're going to hear tomorrow morning at 8:30. We're going to take care of this, and we're going to do it when and where it needs to be taken care of and when it can be taken care of. And Mr. President, to Senator Duckworth's claims, this bill, this amendment I was having before, I'd probably vote for it if it came up in a space where it was appropriate. But to underscore Senator Rest's argument, to ask us to read the title of the bill, this is not a bill about tax relief. This is a bill about tax conformity. So I would suggest that any future amendments that we might hear, I'd ask to respectfully suggest that those individuals who have those amendments articulate those tax changes to federal law, because that's what we're doing. This is about tax conformity, not simply tax relief. And so respectfully, Mr. President, again, saying that I support some of the provisions that have been suggested, I do believe quite wholeheartedly that this amendment is not germane, and I hope that you find it as such.
After listening to the advice on the floor from Senator Duckworth, Senator Westrom, Senator Putnam, and also reading the rules and considering the arguments that I've heard, Senator Rest's point of order is well taken.
Mr. President?
Someone called me.
I did, Mr.
Okay,
President.
there you go. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the A50 amendment.
Senator Duckworth offers the A50 amendment. The secretary will read or report the amendment.
Senator Duckworth moves to amend House File Number 31 as follows. Page 11, line 15. Strike 38,770 and insert 43,950. This is the A50 amendment.
Senator Duckworth, to your A50 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the discussion this far because it has revealed something that I thought might be the case. It shows that there is bipartisan support for tax relief for Minnesotans, whether it's looking at that bottom tier income tax or it's looking at Social Security and the elimination of that completely for our seniors. There's bipartisan support for it, much like there's bipartisan support for the underlying bill. What's missing is the sense of urgency with which we're acting. So what this amendment seeks to do, again, I'm a reasonable guy. I'm willing to compromise. If we can't get rid of it fully, if we can't cut it in half like we agreed to last session, could we at least just reduce it by a quarter and provide some much-needed, timely tax relief to the people of Minnesota who have asked for it? All of us who knocked doors, regardless of your party, heard people begging and pleading for it. Inflation's through the roof. Mortgage rates are up. Times are tough. Let's take action now, today, in a bipartisan manner. Senator Putnam, I welcome you to join me in this. Let's pass it. Let's provide some tax relief. That's what this amendment seeks to do. Thank you.
Mr. President, I rise
Senator
to a
Rest.
point of order.
For what reason do you rise?
To a point of order, sir.
State your point of order.
Thank you once again. The amendment is not in order based on germaneness, Rules 35.2, the second clause. It is intended to accomplish a substantially different purpose than that of the original bill to which it is proposed. We could have 15 amendments that do nothing more than change that percentage. They'd all be out of order, all of them, because we're dealing with a bill that is conformity of Minnesota law to the federal law. What Senator Duckworth has been proposing is changing income tax rates. There is nothing in the bill dealing with federal income tax rates. So that on its own makes it non-germane. So, Mr. President, appreciate once again on its face that this amendment is not germane.
Advice, Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. You can rest assured I don't have 15 more, and I do appreciate the author's willingness to engage in this conversation. I stand with the same advice I offered earlier. As I suspected, Senator Ress is a very tough negotiator, but I'm hopeful with some of the comments that were shared throughout the debate or conversation regarding these amendments that we can prioritize tax relief for the people of Minnesota and our seniors, and not at the end of session, that we can do it much sooner. Thank you.
So, any additional advice? Seeing none, I've listened to all the arguments again. I listened to the arguments of Senator Duckworth. I've listened to the point of order as articulated by Senator Ress. I've read Rule 35. I have concluded, and my ruling is Senator Ress's point of order is well taken. Senator Westrom.
Mr. Chair, I appeal the ruling of the chair.
Senator Westrom appeals the ruling of the president.
Mr. President.
Senator Disick.
Yeah, Mr. President, I request a roll call vote.
A roll call vote has been requested, and a roll call vote has been granted. The secretary will take the roll. I should explain again, shouldn't I? Just a reminder, I should have said this earlier, but a green vote upholds the decision of the president. A red vote overturns the decision of the president. Continue to vote. Thank you. Senator Friends?
Thank you, Mr. President. I report Senator Bolden votes aye.
Senator Bolden votes aye. The secretary will close the roll. With 34 ayes and 33 nays, the point of order and the decision of the president is upheld. Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, I'd like to offer the A6 amendment.
Senator Westrom offers the A6 amendment, and the secretary will report the A6 amendment.
Senator Westrom moves to amend House File Number 31 as follows. Page 23, after line 29, insert. This is the A6 amendment.
Senator Westrom, to your A6 amendment.
Mr. President, members, the A6 amendment deals with conforming Minnesota law to property tax rebates with the surplus that we have for all the taxpayers in Minnesota, giving them a 50% rebate on their property taxes up to $5,000. Members, we need to change Minnesota law to conform with this, deal with giving back the surplus to the hardworking taxpayers of Minnesota, and that's the bill we're dealing with in front of us today, which is tax conformity and tax law changes. I urge your support. Mr. President, I ask for a roll call vote.
A roll call vote has been requested and a roll call vote has been granted. Senator Rest.
Mr. President, I rise to a point of order.
State your point of order.
Thank you, Mr. President. Once again, this amendment, or this next amendment here, is not germane under Rule 35.2, Clause 2, in that it is intended to accomplish a substantially different purpose than that of the original bill to which it is proposed. There is nothing in this bill that deals with Minnesota property taxes or rent rebates or so forth. I would point out, which is not exactly part of the argument of germaneness, if that any of these amendments had gone on the bill, since there would not be time to send the bill back to the House and have it to the governor until, I don't know, next Tuesday or Wednesday, because everybody's not going to be here. We voted on that provision the other day to excuse ourselves from meeting. And 600,000 people on their income taxes and other taxpayers, business taxpayers, would lose out. Would lose out because of the effects of these amendments. 600,000 taxpayers, $104 million ignored and not available. So, Mr. President, once again, I would ask that on its face you find the A6 amendment not germane and out of order.
Advice, Senator Westrom. Advice,
Mr. President.
Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, I would advise that the point of order is not well taken. If you listen to the author's advice to you, it's all kinds of reasons why the current tax bill and getting tax relief to the governor by next Tuesday is good for the taxpayers, but it doesn't deal with the germaneness test. The germaneness test is the amendment related and similar to the topic in front of us. Tax conformity, changes to Minnesota tax laws for relief, spending out of our state budget and budget surplus. That's exactly what this bill does. The author talked about trying to get this to the governor in time. Just because the author wants to expedite the bill doesn't make an amendment not germane to the bill in front of us for debate. If that's going to be the new germaneness test, Mr. President, we have a long year ahead of us, because that means the majority can freeze out the minority every time they want to use the argument, using the author's arguments you just heard, Mr. President. One of the reasons this should not be germane is we can't get the bill to the governor as fast because it would have to go through the legislative process of going back to the House and conforming and conferencing the good ideas from the Senate in tax relief. If they go on, that is the legislative process. But if the reason for germaneness is now going to be elevated to, if the majority thinks we want to get this out faster, therefore the amendment shouldn't go on, that's the new germaneness test? You have just frozen out all of the minority. Mr. President, I think you can correct this path we're on right now. I urge you to, my advice is, this point of order is not well taken.
Having heard any additional advice? Having heard all arguments from Senator Westrom, the point of order as articulated by Senator Rest under 35.2, having also just read the rules over and over again, I find the articulated point of order articulated by Senator Rest as well taken.
Mr. President, I appeal the ruling of the President and ask for a roll call.
The President's decision has been appealed, and a roll call has been requested, and a roll call has been granted. The Secretary will take the roll. And remember, a green vote upholds the decision of the President, and a red vote overturns the decision of the President. Senator Friends.
Thank you, Mr. President. I report Senator Bolden votes aye.
Senator Bolden votes aye. The Secretary will close the roll. With 34 ayes and 33 nays, the point of order is upheld. Senator Westrom?
Mr. President, I'd like to offer the A5 amendment.
Senator Westrom offers the A5 amendment, and the Secretary shall report the amendment.
Senator Westrom moves to amend House File Number 31 as follows. Page 23, after line 29, insert. This is the A5 amendment.
Senator Westrom to the A5 amendment.
Mr. President, members, this amendment would conform Minnesota tax law and give a sales tax rebate to all tax-paying Minnesotans, up to $1,100 per family over the next 2 years, $1,100 each year, and $550 each year for the next 2 years to individual filers, with the state surplus giving it back to the taxpayers through a sales tax rebate, something this legislature has done in the previous years. It's another way to conform our tax laws, give the surplus back to the taxpayers of Minnesota, and in a fair way over the next 2 years, with $1,100 per family in tax relief, conforming with Minnesota tax laws so those families can receive that tax relief through a sales tax rebate. I urge your support, Mr. President. I would ask for a roll call vote.
Mr. President, I rise to a point of order.
A roll call vote has been requested and a roll call vote has been granted. Senator Rest.
I rise to a point of order, Mr. President.
State your point of order, Senator Rest.
This amendment is out of order. According to Senate Rule 35.2, Clause 2, the amendment is intended to accomplish a substantially different purpose than that of the original bill to which it is proposed. Period.
Advice from the body? Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, my advice would be to rule the point of order not well taken. Mr. President, my previous comments on the last amendment would stand again. For the advice I would give you as President of this Senate, Mr. President, this clearly fits within the relief and tax conformity bill that is in front of us. We are expending money out of the state general fund and out of the future surplus that's projected. We are conforming Minnesota tax laws, changing Minnesota tax laws to give tax relief to Minnesotans that pay taxes in our state. We are not changing federal income tax laws, as the author earlier discussed. We are changing Minnesota tax laws in this bill, conforming with changes that we want to pass and give relief to taxpayers. This amendment does the same thing, conforms, changes Minnesota tax laws, expends money out of the state general fund and surplus to give that tax relief money back to the Minnesota taxpayers. It can't be more clear than that, Mr. President. I urge you to find this point of order not well taken and open up the opportunity for Minnesotans to have tax relief, an amendment and changes to a tax bill that offer tax relief when we have a tax bill in front of us. It's that simple.
Having heard the arguments from Senator Westrom and the advice given by Senator Westrom, as well as the articulated Rule 35.2 submitted by Senator Rest, I rule that the point of order is well taken.
President?
Any further?
Mr. President, I appeal the decision of the President and ask for a roll call vote.
Senator Westrom appeals the ruling of the President and has requested a roll call. As a reminder, a red vote, well, the question before the body, first of all, is shall the decision of the President be the judgment of the Senate? And that's under Senate Rule 14.4. And remember, members, that a green vote upholds the decision of the President and a red vote overrules the decision of the President. The Secretary will take the roll.
Mr. President, we are in the middle of a roll call, and members should be at their desks, including
please.
Senator Drazkowski.
Senator Friends.
Thank you, Mr. President. I report Senator Bolden votes aye.
Senator Bolden votes aye, and the Secretary will close the roll. There being 34 ayes and 33 nays, the point of order and the President's decision is upheld. Any additional discussion? Seeing none? Oh, who? Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Lucero. Forgive me for not saying you, Senator.
That's okay, Mr. President. I appreciate recognizing myself. I'd like to make an oral amendment.
State your oral amendment.
On line 9.26, it currently reads 80%. I'd like to change that to 100%.
To the oral amendment, any additional, I'm sorry, the Secretary shall report the oral amendment before you articulate your thoughts.
Senator Lucero moves to amend House File 31 as follows. On page 9, line 26, delete 80 and insert 100.
Senator Lucero, to your oral amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I would also like to ask for a roll call.
Roll call vote has been requested and a roll call granted.
Thank you, Mr. President. So it's my understanding that businesses that currently have a net operating loss are able to deduct that, but there's a maximum. And you can see that current 80% is the maximum. And I asked staff, and with consultation of Senate staff, that increasing that to 100, I wanted to confirm my understanding, increasing that from 80 to 100 would allow businesses with a net operating loss to be able to fully deduct their losses. As we've seen the pandemic, businesses have suffered incredibly. And there's been other forces in recent months and years that have put an incredible strain on our hardworking businesses across the state. And I believe that increasing this number from 80 to 100 would not only help those businesses, but would help the great hardworking Minnesotans that they employ. Because if there's less taxes that are being paid after having suffered a loss, the businesses are allowed to keep more money in their business, and with that additional money in their business, they're able to invest more, whether it be purchasing additional capital, to expand hiring additional employees, perhaps offering additional benefits to existing employees. And so when a business suffers a loss, we should recognize that loss fully and not cap them at 80%. But I do not sit on the tax committee, so I would ask Senator Weber if he's in his seat. I don't know if he's there. He's not there. And I don't know who I don't know who else is on the tax committee. Oh, is he coming?
Senator Lucero, you can continue to speak
Mr.
to
President,
me, but not your thoughts out randomly. Would you
yes,
like
I would
someone
ask
to yield?
if Senator Weber would yield for a question.
Senator Weber, will you yield? He will yield. Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Weber. My question is, I just want to confirm that's my understanding, is that this not being a member of the tax committee, not having heard this bill in any committee before it came to the Senate floor, is my understanding correct that this provision on line 9.26, the 80%, does cap a business's ability to deduct their losses at that 80%?
Senator Weber.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, the item that's listed there limits it to the 80%, and whereas it would normally be able to be subtracted at 100%.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you. Okay, well then I'm correct, and it even I think makes it very important, more important, emphasizes the point that we should make this change, Mr. President. And I would hope that the majority would agree with me that we need to offer the maximum relief we can. As we've seen, unfortunately, other amendments to offer relief to Minnesotans across the entire state, hopefully the majority in this body would be willing to offer maximum relief to our businesses that have been struggling and straining through these recent years and all of the forces that they've had to endure. So, Mr. President, I highly encourage everybody to vote green. Thank you.
Mr. President, I rise to a point of order.
Senator Russ, for what purpose do you rise?
I rise to a point of order under germaneness.
State your purpose.
35.2, Clause 2, that Senator Lucero's attempt at an amendment, once again, it is intended to accomplish a substantially different purpose. This is a bill on conformity, not about necessarily changing other kinds of Minnesota tax laws. Prepare a bill, introduce it, and likely to have a hearing in the tax committee. But it's not a conformity item. It would be a new tax law. Mr. President, once again, on its face, the amendment is not germane.
Advice, Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. President. To me, it can't be any more relevant and germane to a bill to change a number that's in the bill. I'm not introducing any new language other than modifying existing language that is in the bill, in the proposal. By changing the percentage from 80 to 100 is certainly germane. Certainly germane. So I would hope, Mr. President, that you would rule the point of order not well taken.
Advice, Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to concur with my colleague, Senator Lucero. Mr. President, this has to be germane in the fact that it is part of the title of the bill. It is part of the new language that is underlined in the bill, and it has always been the past practice of this body to be able to amend bills. If we take Senator Rest at her explanation, any change to any bill is not germane because it meets a different intention. This is already being changed. Whether or not this particular number is being changed, this clause is part of the changes in the bill in front of us, and therefore it should be listed as germane.
Advice, Senator Lucero.
Mr. President, thank you. And I don't know how you're going to rule. I wish I did know how you were going to rule. But because I cannot read your mind, I'm going to withdraw my oral amendment.
The oral amendment has been withdrawn. Any other discussions? Seeing that there's no further discussion on the bill and seeing none, who? Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. So we're on final passage?
I was getting ready to read to the third reading, and then we'd be on final passage, and then you will have the ability to speak if that's what you'd like to do.
Okay, I'd like to speak on final passage.
All right, seeing no further discussion on the bills, the Secretary will give House File 31 its third reading.
House File Number 31, a bill for an act relating to taxation, individual income, and corporate franchise.
Third reading. Now, Senator Gruenhagen.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. First, I'd just like to thank Senator Rest for bringing a tax reduction bill to the Senate floor. It's desperately needed, and I wish it was for more, but I understand it's a conformity bill. Hopefully, we'll see more tax reduction in the future. You know, one of the things that I think people need to understand, and I believe it's an economic law, is that when you reduce taxes and become more competitive, you actually increase tax revenues. Okay, let me say that again. When you reduce taxes and you become more competitive, you actually increase tax revenues in the future. Now, you don't have to believe me, but hopefully you'll believe MMB, Minnesota Management and Budget, that comes out with a quarterly report. And I happen to have kept one quarterly report. It was back in, I believe, March of 2015. In there, MMB stated that when gas prices dropped significantly, it was equal to a tax reduction on Minnesota's families and businesses. The result was that I think the average family in the state of Minnesota saved about $900. MMB went on to say that this $900 savings for family resulted in increased private sector activity, which resulted in, at that particular time, increased tax revenues and a surplus to the state of Minnesota totaling, I believe it was $2 billion. So remember, and this was MMB under Governor Dayton, so remember, lower competitive tax rates equal more private sector activity, which results in more tax revenues. Okay, the second thing I'd like to say, you know, when you look at the Senate fiscal tracking or this research paper I have, it says that we're reducing taxes by $102 million and that this is going to result in lower tax revenues in the future. Well, Mr. President and members, I think you need to understand the difference between static and dynamic scoring, economic scoring of tax reductions. What I mean by that is, under static scoring, which is what Minnesota uses, when you see a reduction in tax rates or taxes, you translate that into lower tax revenues, okay? That's under static. Under dynamic scoring, and some states use dynamic scoring, you take into consideration that lower competitive tax rates results in increased private sector economic activity, which results in higher tax revenues. So, an accountant shared me this analysis. He said, under static scoring, you're precisely wrong in terms of the reduction of tax revenues. Under dynamic scoring, you're approximately right. So members, would you rather be precisely wrong or approximately right? I'd rather be approximately right. So members, I've introduced bills in the past to require the scoring of bills to be dynamically scored. I probably will introduce one this session also. And I would ask Senator Rest that when it's introduced, if she would consider a hearing on it. It's a discussion worth having, okay? And so members, just a minute. So members, most analysis of the state of Minnesota places us in the top 5 highest tax states in the nation. I know there's different analysis. The point to remember, though, is this last year, we had over almost 20,000 residents leave the state of Minnesota. I would dare say the majority of them are taxpayers in the state, and we've lost them and their revenue. So we need to come up with a competitive tax rate for our neighboring 5 states, and even as far as across this country. So Senator Rest, I would again thank you for bringing this conformity bill forward and look forward to further tax reductions on the hardworking businesses and taxpayers of the state of Minnesota. Thank you, Mr. President and members.
Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Again, I do want to commend Senator Rest for the work she's done and Senator Weber and others to bring this bill forward as quickly as they did, as early on as they did. To me, it is reminiscent of another time when we found a bipartisan agreement, and that was to move the PPP loan conformity bill that needed to get passed last session. I believe with bipartisan support, we passed that out of this chamber fairly quickly. I think it was hamstrung in the other chamber. But that speaks to what I think is really important. As we've got folks all across the state of Minnesota hoping and praying that we provide them some relief when it comes to their incomes, the word urgency comes to mind. Now, I don't think when they cast their ballots last November, they expected us to get up here and get around to at some point providing them tax relief. I think they expected it fairly immediately, as was consistent with talking points from both parties to include the governor. Whether it's rebate checks, whether it's cutting that bottom income tax tier in half, whether it's eliminating the tax on Social Security, these are things that voters have been asking us for, pleading for years. And now we get here and we see that a particular party has total control and the ability to move very speedily on some of these things. And for whatever reason, they're choosing not to, or they're not prioritizing it at least. And when the state is also sitting on an $18 billion surplus, the fact that the state of Minnesota can't afford to do it falls pretty flat with Minnesotans who expect us to get the work done on their behalf. And I apologize if I seem a little fired up, but I'm channeling the passion that I'm getting from constituents on a daily basis, and I know you're getting it too. Specifically regarding the elimination of that tax on Social Security income, and specifically from tax-paying Minnesotans who are watching our surplus grow month after month after month while they continue to struggle to afford to provide for their families month after month after month. We've got bipartisan support to pass these things. What's missing is the urgency to get it done. We're ready to do it. We proposed some amendments today to help get it done. Please work with us to make it happen. I fear that our economic situation is only going to become more and more difficult for folks. I'll share just one quick story with you. Last year, I received a call to my office from a lovely woman. Her name was Doris, and she was absolutely beside herself because the place at which she was paying rent in Lakeville was going up $60 a month. The fact that her rent was going up $60 a month was such a terrifying hardship for her and her financial situation that she called my office just to plead with me and say, what can you do? What relief can you provide? I told her, I said, you know what? I've got good news for you. Both Republicans and Democrats are talking specifically about eliminating that tax on Social Security. We're going to keep working hard to provide it for you, and I think we've got agreement across the aisle to do it. And she's still waiting for that relief. And it's something we can do right away. So I ask you, we're obviously not going to do it today, but whether it's coming through the tax committee, whether it's being worked on in both chambers, please, let's not wait till May. Let's not wait till next year. Let's look at meaningful tax reform to help people provide for and take care of their loved ones. Thank you.
Senator Weber. Senator Weber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just like to say that I agree with Senator Gruenhagen when he talked about the fact that here is a bill that is offering tax relief to the people of Minnesota. You know, in recent years, across the board, there hasn't necessarily been nearly as much of that as there should have been. The last 2 days in tax committee, Senator Rest has held hearings regarding the proposed bill, that omnibus bill, and tax conference report that unfortunately didn't get across the line. Included in that last year were many of the provisions that have been talked about on the floor today. There were many provisions that would have offered substantial tax relief, not only in terms of income tax, but in property tax and in a variety of other ways for the citizens of Minnesota. And it was well on its way to coming in front of the House and the Senate. We had individually approved all 9 articles of that conference report. And we, as the Senate conferees, sat there waiting for the meeting to start, whereby that conference report would have been forwarded to the bodies in the legislature. But then the governor and the Speaker of the House pulled the rug out from under us, and there was no conference report. There was no elimination of Social Security from the tax stream. There was no increase of exemption amounts for homesteads, farm, and resorts, and residential. There were a lot of things that did not get done because of that decision to not allow the conference report to come forward. As Senator Rest has indicated, many of those items are not part of the tax conformity bill, and I understand that. And I do thank her for the willingness that she has been to be forthcoming and upfront with myself as the lead and with the members of my caucus as relates to this bill. And I look forward to a good working relationship with her for the rest of this session. Actually, yesterday, as we were talking about the conference report last year and the glowing remarks she made about it, I offered to provide her the votes that she needed if she wanted to move that forward right then and there. Somehow she decided that she couldn't do that at that point. But at this stage, thank you, Senator Rest, for your cooperation and your working together with us. And I would encourage the members of my caucus to vote for this tax conformity bill. Thank you very much.
Any other discussion before I go to the author? I will go to the author last. Remember, I said at the top that I'll try to be as respectful as possible and always go to the author last. Senator Grudenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I just would like to make one more comment. You know, as long as we're on taxes, it is important from an economic standpoint to understand what are the primary ways of generating and growing the economy, the private sector economy, which generates increased taxes, which helps all of our citizens with jobs, benefits, and other things. And one of the things I learned from Milton Friedman, who happened to be a Nobel Prize-winning economist, was that there's only 3 ways to grow the economy, primarily. One is to grow something like our farmers do. That actually expands the economic pie for our citizens and state. The second thing is to manufacture a product that somebody wants to buy. So we need to be friendly to our manufacturers here in the state of Minnesota. The third way to grow the economic pie that benefits all of us and the citizens of the state of Minnesota and even our children is through mining, okay? So you have basically 3 ways. You have grow something like our farmers do, you have mining, and then you have manufacturing. A lot of the rest of the stuff, you know, sports, and I'm a sports fan, but all it does is shift money back and forth. It doesn't really grow the economic pie to benefit our state and our citizens. The other thing to understand, there is a way to make those 3 ways more efficient, to generate even more tax dollars. And we happen to live at a time of great technological progress. So, you know, I'll just give an example. In 1945, let's say it took 100 people to make 100 widgets. And I never did figure out what a widget was, but let's just use that as an example. And today, or let's just say in 2010, it only took 2 people to make 100 widgets. Well, that's productivity. And productivity will also increase the economic pie in those 3 areas that I talked about later. So members, let's keep that in mind, a lower competitive tax rate, emphasizing those 3 areas will actually grow the economic pie in the state of Minnesota, increase our tax revenues, and we're able to do the things we want to for not only the citizens and businesses of the state of Minnesota, but also our children. Thank you, Mr. President, and I urge a green vote on this bill.
Okay, Senator Nelson.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Well, members, this bill has been a long time coming. As I noted, this body has already supported on May 11th of 2022 by a large bipartisan vote many of the provisions in this tax bill. And yes, this is important. It's time we get it to the taxpayers in time where it will benefit them as they go to start filing their taxes. And it's important during this time of high inflation to return those over collections, those tax collections that are far and above our budget and our state needs. And it is past time that we return those to Minnesota taxpayers. I must say that it is good news that we're doing this now. I have a heavy heart that it wasn't done last year when there was such agreement with every word adopted in that conference committee. May that never happen again, that a body refuses to pass what has been agreed upon because they don't agree with other things. Minnesota taxpayers have been waiting for this. It is time we pass it. I appreciate the leadership of Senator Rest in properly reviewing and pushing forward not only this conformity bill, but the good hearings that we've had on many of the other tax relief provisions that had great bipartisan agreement. My hope that this is just the beginning of the needed tax relief that Minnesotans deserve and need. I encourage a green vote.
We're on the third reading or final passage of House File 31. Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, members, I'm troubled that I have to get up and talk about this bill and what I have to talk about. But members, what we have just witnessed here is and should be of great concern to every member of the Senate, majority and minority. And for the new members, I hope this can be a pivot point that we turn away from. But the freezing out of the minority that we just saw with the procedural process to block tax relief of non-germaneness has went to a point of outrageousness. Members, many of those amendments offering tax relief should have been germane to a bill conforming and changing Minnesota tax laws. Every one of them dealt with changes to Minnesota tax laws. Maybe not the exact words that were in the bill. That has never been the germaneness test. But they all dealt with changing Minnesota tax laws and what percentages we collect or what percentages we give back in rebates or credits. And if that wasn't outrageous enough, members, we just witnessed the attempt of calling non-germane, changing one number in the bill that already exists from 80 to 100% as non-germane. Members, think about how that is going to turn this democracy into something much more closer to a dictatorship. Because if you're going to freeze out all the ideas of the minority by calling non-germane a change to a number that exists in a bill, we are on the edge of a precedent that will not allow any word to be changed or number to be changed in a bill with what we just saw today by the author of this bill. So, members, I debated whether I should talk about it and when I should. But it needs to be talked about, and that's why I was troubled that I have to raise and stand and talk about this bill. But the moment is now. We just witnessed this kind of power grab or freezing out of the minority with a procedural vote of non-germaneness that has been expanded so far that if this continues, there will not be a change allowed to a bill brought to the floor. Mr. President, I hope you think long and hard about that. I hope every member, new members especially, but all members, we are at an edge that we should not even have to be talking about. Of freezing out debate, freezing out minority or dissenting views, when you cannot change a number from 80% to 100% in a bill that exists right in front of us, without the author raising a germaneness test and arguing that that is not germane to the bill. We are in a dangerous place, and I hope that is not the plan of the majority. But what we witnessed today is outrageous and a gross abuse of power, and I hope this changes, and that's the reason I'm bringing it up. Because we are at a pivotal point. And if what we just witnessed today continues, the people of Minnesota are going to be unserved. The voices that they elect to come to this Capitol and make changes and amend bills no longer exists, and our democracy turns into a dictatorship. And I'm going to stand up for our constitutional rights and our democracy and our freedom of speech. And that's why I had to stand up here, Mr. President, and talk about this bill. Because the content of the bill and tax relief is great. But the process and the freezing out that we saw today and the attempts to freeze out with procedural votes was outrageous, and it needs to change. And I hope this is a pivotal point that everybody wakes up and looks at this with a new lens.
Any further discussion? I want to make sure that I have everyone before I go to Senator Rest, because once Senator Rest rises, I will not recognize anyone else other than a leader from the minority or a leader from the majority. Seeing no further discussion, Senator Rest.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. We have a wonderful opportunity today. The first bill to go to the governor with strong bipartisan support. And what does that bill do? It brings tax relief to 600,000 Minnesota taxpayers. Thank you so much for your cooperation and support. Means a great deal to me, not only as a member of this body, but also personally.
Senator Johnson already indicated that he was going to let his other folks speak. Senator Diesick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members, for the good discussion. I also want to thank the tax committee and the tax staff. As I've said here many times before, we have fabulous both partisan and nonpartisan staff here. They work really hard, and I want to specifically thank them for their quick action on this bill. By getting this bill done today, we are showing Minnesotans that we came here to work, and we mean it, and we're getting to work. This conformity bill provides $100 million in tax cuts to businesses, to families all across this state. This is a good bill. Vote yes.
All right, the secretary will take roll on final passage. Secretary will take the roll. Senator Friends.
Thank you, Mr. President. I report Senator Bolden votes aye.
Senator Bolden votes aye. The secretary will close the roll. Seeing 67 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and the title agreed to. All right, we will now proceed to The 13th order of business, announcements of Senate interest. Any excuses for today? Any announcements about committees? Senator Putnam.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to announce that the Committee on Agriculture, Broadband, and Rural Development will have a delayed start today, so we will start at 3:30 today.
Thank you. Senator Friends.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, the Senate Energy, Utilities, Environment, and Climate Committee will meet 15 minutes from adjournment. And I want to extend my thanks, Mr. President, to Senator Putnam, allowing our committee an extra half an hour to get our work done today by delaying the start of the Agriculture Committee. Members, starting in 15 minutes. Thank you.
Senator Latz.
Mr. President, Judiciary Committee will meet immediately following adjournment. Members, please move to room 15 promptly. Our first item will be the Crown Act.
Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Transportation will delay its start to 3:30.
Senator Marty.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, the Senate Council and fiscal analysts put together every couple of years, they put together a briefing for everybody on the budget if people are interested in it. I think they do it. It's several hours of presentation, I think 4 or 5 hours. They're hoping to have that available and ready sometime next week. We'll be sending you out notice. But if members or staff have interest, it's a very helpful background for people.
Any additional announcements? Senator Disick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to make sure members saw the email, members and staff saw the email earlier today, I believe from Secretary Bodern. It also might have came from Alexis Stengel, the Nonpartisan Legislative Staff Fair. So this is where you can meet different nonpartisan staff and people from different legislative bodies, including the Legislative Coordinating Commission, and learn about how they can support our work here at the legislature. This is tomorrow from noon to 2 in the vault. Thank you.
Senator Swaziski, are you certain that you don't have anything?
I always have something, but education policy is going to be postponing under the circumstances.
All right, thank you. Any additional announcements of Senate interest? Senator Disick, for a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate do now adjourn until January 12th, tomorrow at 11 a.m.
All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. The Senate is now adjourned.